Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar titled Optimizing Real-World Evidence to Improve Maternal and Neonatal Outcomes. This webinar is sponsored by HealthCore, so a huge thank you to them for helping to make this event possible. Joining us today, we're fortunate to have 5 experts from Health System Innovators, CPATH, patients from Preemie World, healthcare payers from HealthCore Anthem, and industry partners from Bayer participating in this webinar. So I'll first introduce Dr. Eric Stanek, who serves as a scientific and clinical leader on research projects ranging from health economics and outcomes research to prospective pragmatic clinical trials at Anthem. Next up, we have Dr. Michael Grabner, who has 10 years of experience conducting health economics and outcomes research using a variety of study designs, data sources, and statistical methods. He's responsible for developing research solutions for clients in the life sciences with HealthCore. Our third speaker with us today is Deb, mother to a 30-week preemie, a leadership team member of the International Neonatal Consortium, the founder of Preemie World, Crystal Ball Health, and co-founder of the Alliance for Black NICU Families. We also have Jennifer Daigle joining us, who is a mother to a micro-preemie and a member of the International Neonatal Consortium's leadership team. She's also an author, public speaker, and founder of Speaking for Moms and Babies, Inc. And our final speaker joining us is Dr. Thomas Miller, Vice President and Global Head of Pediatric Development for Bayer's Pharmaceutical Division, whose career in the life science industry spans more than 25 years, with the primary focus on the development of therapeutics, medical devices, and combination products for infirm children. It's lovely to have you all here with us today for this exciting event. I'm now going to bring on our first speakers. Eric and Michael, thank you for being here with us today. Please take it away whenever you're ready.
Great. Thank you, Sydney. And good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Eric and myself will be presenting a real-world case study in the area of preterm birth and provide some additional thoughts from a payer perspective regarding the use of real-world data for our purposes. Here are our disclosures. I'll leave this up for just a moment. Most importantly, the funding for the case study was provided by Sarah Prognostics, the maker of the preterm test. HealthCore is a health services research company and also a subsidiary of Anthem, which is one of the largest national health insurance companies in the US, with about 45 million active members in 2021. That is important for us for multiple reasons. One, it provides a large population available for research. It provides a large range of data sources for research, the backbone of which are medical and pharmacy claims. It also provides a wealth of information that help us interpret how these data have been generated. For example, benefit designs that can shape what you see in the claims data may not be available for other data sources, but for us at HealthCore, we have the context within Anthem to be able to interpret those patterns. Besides working a lot with Anthem, we also collaborate with other subsidiaries at Anthem. For example, Anthem's PBM, IngenioRx, as listed here. And beyond that, HealthCore has for a long time collaborated with various clients from the life science industry, academia, and government agencies. For example, we've been long a member of the Sentinel Initiative for post-market surveillance. And all of this research we do is real-world based. So let's briefly align on the definitions of real-world data and real-world evidence. These definitions on the slide are taken from the FDA. Real-world data is defined as the data relating to patient health status or the delivery of health care in a routine setting and collected from a variety of sources such as electronic health records, claims data, disease registries, and increasingly patient-generated data. Any evidence regarding utilization of medical interventions, potential benefits, risks, costs, that are derived from this type of real-world data is then referred to as real-world evidence and can be generated using many different study designs. HealthCore focuses on observational studies, both prospective and retrospective. We have other teams as well, though, who have are doing trials as well. And here I hand it over to Eric for an introduction to the preterm birth domain.
Great, thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. Just want to go over some basics for everybody to orient you regarding, what we're looking at in the United States regarding the burden of preterm birth. As you know, there are about 4 million babies born in the U.S. every year. Unfortunately, about 10% of those babies, about 380,000 or so, are born prematurely. One of the issues that attendant with premature birth is the risk of infant mortality, and roughly 17% of infant deaths, can be attributed to preterm birth or low birth weight. Beyond that burden, there is a significant cost and resource burden associated with being a premature baby. The cost of a preterm delivery are 12 times or more higher than the cost of a full-term delivery. And it's been estimated that the burden of preterm birth in the United States is around $25 billion on an annual basis. Babies who are born prematurely have significantly longer lengths of stay than full-term babies, 17 days on average for a premature infant versus 3 days for a full-term baby. And of those hospital stays, roughly somewhere between 55 and 70% are in the intensive care unit or the neonatal intensive care unit, compared to just 9% for a full-term baby. Additionally, the preterm birth burden for the baby is very significant, not just in the near term, but also in the long term or lifelong. Premature babies are at a significantly higher risk for a number of morbid conditions, including cerebral palsy, respiratory disease, cardiovascular complications, and significant delays in physical and emotional and mental development. Beyond the impact directly on the child, the impact on the family can be quite profound. The family, the parents, the mother can suffer significant psychological burden, behavioral health disorders, anxiety and depression, as well as significant burdens financially, and also related to being able to work and be productive at work with an ill child. As a payer, we are particularly interested in maternity and preterm, and specifically preterm birth, in that at Anthem we have over 400,000 babies born per year that are our members, and that represents roughly 11% of all the babies born in the United States. So all of this burden that we are speaking of is realized in our members, and as well as for our clients as well. And one of the biggest challenges that we have in addressing preterm birth is that the majority of preterm babies are born to mothers with no known risk factors, which makes targeting interventions extremely difficult. Here we then can introduce a new technology that can help overcome that shortcoming of existing means of screening for preterm birth risk. The preterm test from Seroprognostics is a simple test that is done from a venous blood sample in the 19th to 20th week of pregnancy in women who at the time are asymptomatic. They're carrying they're singleton pregnancies, meaning they're carrying a single fetus. And at the time, in that 19 to 20th week window, they are without any evident other preterm birth risk. This test measures two circulating proteins and the ratio of those proteins, and has been shown in clinical validation studies to be sensitive and specific around the 75% level. This test allows the identification and quantification of preterm birth risk in those four out of 5 moms who today we cannot determine that risk. Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Eric. Let's take a look at the evolving evidence base for the preterm test. As always, you start with analytic and clinical validity. Those have been established through multiple publications. Anthem then really got engaged when it came to demonstrating the economic value of the test. To start with, we took a previously published budget impact model and replicated it, as well as populating it with data from the Anthem membership. We further developed this into a full cost effectiveness model, and I will speak a bit more about that in a moment. Conducted in both the commercial, the insured, and the Medicaid insured population. And data from all of these models and other publications were inputs into a financial model that Anthem then created to help understand the business impact of adopting this test. Currently, there are several studies underway that look at the clinical utility of the test. That is a combination of screening through the test followed by an appropriate evidence-based treatment strategy and how that compares to usual care. One of those studies, the PRIME study listed here in bold, has co-sponsorship by Anthem. And lastly, once the test will be widely available, that will be another opportunity to then look at real-world data generated from the use of that test to further understand its impact. The cost-effectiveness analysis was published a year ago. We had a large team to support this, as you can see on the author list here. There's a lot of expertise necessary for these kinds of studies, economic expertise, clinical expertise, modeling expertise, and we appreciate our collaborators on this study. Our main finding is that the use of the preterm test, when combined with evidence-based treatment, achieves something that you rarely see in healthcare, which is both an improvement in effectiveness, that is, a reduction in the number of preterm births, as well as a reduction in the overall amount of costs that were accrued within the population. I'd like to highlight a few methodological challenges we had to address as part of this modeling exercise. First, we had to define the model structure in such a way that is complex enough to accommodate the different decision points, and the fact that we wanted to look at preterm not only in a binary sense, was it full term versus preterm, but track changes across the entire gestational age at birth distribution. At the same time, we want to keep it simple, and so we wanted to abstract from certain items that could be important in specific cases, but on a population level, fortunately are not happening a lot, such as infant mortality. Number two, to populate the model, we need information about those treatment effects. And while there were several studies out there that looked at different types of interventions, we conducted our own meta-analysis to combine these findings to both have a reasonable base case for our model as well as worst and best case scenarios. Number three, since we wanted to use as much data from the Anthem population as we could, we used the claims data to set up a cohort of moms and infants where the moms were those who fit the intended use population of the preterm test, as Eric had mentioned, for example, those with singleton births only. And we used this cohort for multiple inputs, for example, costs, and we'll see that in a moment. And number four, it was necessary to look at a large range of input parameters for the model and come up with reasonable base case and sensitivity analysis ranges, some supported by literature, others populated by data, and others again coming out of a conversation with different subject matter experts. This figure shows the cost distribution. You have 1 year costs plotted here for both moms and infants using 2018 dollars. A few things stand out. Maternal costs when arranged by gestational age at birth, with lower ages or very preterm births on the left and late preterm births on the right, are relatively stable, while infant costs are heavily right skewed, with very large costs for early preterm babies, and the cost burden then decreasing rapidly as you approach full term birth. This is an important input for the model because it, for example, informs how even a shift from a very early to an early preterm birth can have a substantial impact. It is also something for us to use as a benchmark regarding how Anthem commercial data compared to the US data, and that ended up aligning really well. Finally, this is a figure that nicely encapsulates the findings of the study. We're looking here at a cost effectiveness plane where on the x-axis you can see the extra number of preterm births prevented from the use of this test, and on the y-axis the reduction in costs. The yellow X marks our base case estimate, which was associated with roughly 900 fewer preterm births and $50 million in cost savings in this cohort of roughly 60,000 moms and infants. You can also see the cloud made up of blue points. Those are 10,000 simulation results where all of the different inputs, except for effectiveness, were varied within their plausible ranges. We can see that there is certainly a difference in how many preterm births were prevented, as well as in how many costs were saved. But we also see that in all scenarios, this ended up being a dominant strategy where there was a reduction in preterm births and there was a reduction in costs, which is quite remarkable. And I'll hand it back over to Eric for our last section. Thank you.
Good, thank you, Mike. And the certainly the the case study here around the syrup preterm test and real-world evidence evolution provides a great example of payer involvement in maternal and child health. As a payer, though, our interest does not end there. And at Anthem, there is a group formed focused on maternal and child health within the Anthem Enterprise Analytics Hub. This is a multidisciplinary team effort focused on understanding costs and maternal and neonatal and infant outcomes, quality of care across geographies, providers, different levels of disparity in social determinants of health, comorbidities, and procedures. And all of this output advises clinical policy, clinical programs, innovative payment programs, and contributes to the scientific literature, all intended to improve maternal and child health outcomes. Beyond this, HealthCore has a significant real-world evidence portfolio that works with various external clients, including government and life science partners, which also includes agencies such as the FDA and the EMA. And as pregnant women are often excluded from trials, real-world evidence on safety and effectiveness is quite necessary, and the HealthCore team is very active in that area. We work across a variety of therapeutic areas to take a look at this, as well as different multiple different drug classes. Overall, we hope that this has demonstrated for you at least some level of insight into how payers can provide unique perspectives and provide leadership in real-world evidence generation in maternal child care, which can complement efforts that we'll hear from other stakeholders next. And with that, I'll say thank you for your attention, and you can reach out to us at any of the contact information here if you're interested in learning more. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for such an informative presentation. That was really interesting. So we'll bring you back on towards the end for the Q&A. But next, I'd like to welcome Deb and Jen. So please dive right in whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I'm Deb DeSenza, and that was a great presentation by HealthCore. I am very honored to be partnered across my organizations with Sarah Prognostics and have heard fabulous things about the preterm test. So, and great work. I will go first, and we're going to talk about parent perspectives because they are crucial to all of this. I'm Deb DeSenza. You can read and check out all my organizations. I joke that I'm the MOM of Becky. She was my daughter, born in 2003. You will see her here in this slide with me. This is the first time I held her. I was shaking while holding her, and I was terrified. I was afraid I was going to break her. Becky was definitely fragile. She had her honeymoon and then dipped. 26 weeks gestation. I told my OB that I thought I might have a baby early, that I had been a little early myself, and she ignored me. I kept saying it. I really think this baby's coming early. No, she ignored me. Well, surprise, a month later, 30 weeks gestation, just under 3 pounds. She had her own little NICU stay. We almost lost her twice. That's not like every other family out there that has had a micro previe where it's significantly higher, where they're resuscitating the baby. We were lucky that Becky got to go home 38 days later, and she went home on oxygen and a monitor. I felt more like a nurse than I did her mother. It was terrifying, and I felt like a complete failure when Becky ended up back in the hospital 5 days later for breathing issues and for feeding issues. So here we are, parents. We often talk about that hospital bill. We hear the number 1 million, 2 million thrown around. It's probably even higher now. This NICU care is really high end. We are told this. We also know that the NICU is funding the rest of the hospital. So when you think about it, you go, wow, so all this high end research in the NICU must be incredible because they do stuff for cancer, diabetes, and obviously now COVID. And then you find out otherwise. You find out that the research is actually quite low. John Davis, who's on our International Neonatal Consortium team, was on the surfactant team. That was decades ago. The reason why Jen and I are so passionate is not because we need more things to do in our lives. It's not a stay in the NICU for us. This is a lifelong issue. Our children will continue to have issues as they get older. And my daughter is now 18. It's a huge amount of challenges in every possible way. And then you add in racism. That makes it 10 times worse. We're not MDs, but we're MLMs, and we have a strong influence. We remind you along the way. The patient insight has strong key points to give you. At Inc., I joke with our global stakeholders that I was going to take roll call to make sure that they created and were part of pooling the data in our real world evidence collaboration. Everyone laughed, but boy, a whole bunch of people set up meetings. They heard us. That's important. Jen and I sit on the leadership team for Inc. We're valued members. We do all sorts of things. One of the crowning achievements for us was being asked to write a parent commentary for the Journal of Pediatrics. We were heard. That's important. I also started a project codenamed Preemie Crystal Ball, which pools data in a different way along the lifespan of that premature baby. And I want to be able to share that data with Inc. and with other sources to be able to help generate better research. Why do I care? My daughter Becky, the baby that wasn't supposed to be early, that was supposed to be late because it was my first pregnancy, autism, ADHD, and it's CP at 13 and a half years old, even though I've been asking for a better part of a decade, questioning doctors and specialists. That's insane to me. I have resources, I have means, I have education, I have a strong patient advocate backbone. But even I got gobsmacked when that diagnosis came at that point. And I was premature too. I'm as old as neonatology. I see so many families struggling in and out of the NICU. It's disturbing. And these babies are our legacy in this community. We should all care, preemie or not. Families get ripped apart. The coordination for NICU, post-NICU coordination, the benefits, it's severely lacking, and it's all dependent on the state's budget. Is it any wonder that we find in our news feeds that the families are struggling, that there's abuse, that there's murder, suicide? I see this all the time. This is a big deal, and we really have to work hard to make changes to improve this community. It's well beyond time. I will also tell you that the International Neonatal Consortium has been very open to receiving feedback and commentary from parent stakeholders, increasingly so. And you'll hear more from Jen in a moment. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Deb. Listening to the first presentation about the statistics, which I am very well, aware of, and hearing the word burden, as you know, that's a hard word to hear. It's accurate. It is a burden on healthcare. Premature births are certainly a burden on the family, but just it's a little bit difficult to hear. But I understand why that is the word, and it just kind of brings me into why I'm sitting here today. So I'm Jennifer Deagle. I am a maternal near miss survivor. My premature birth story is a bit different than Deb's. I had 3 C-sections before I had my last pregnancy with my daughter. And I didn't want them. They were necessary, at least the first 2, and then you don't have a choice and it has to go to that direction from there. And my daughter, when I was pregnant with her, she implanted on my scar tissue from the previous C-sections. So I ended up with, many of you would know, to be advanced case of placenta precreta. And when I say advanced case, that's like an understatement. I had hemorrhaged at 17 weeks pregnant and needed, countless units of blood back and forth. I was able to stay pregnant until just 23 weeks gestation. But that was mostly in the hospital with my 3 little boys at home that were 3, 5, and 7. And like Deb, I'm educated. I'm actually a full-time science teacher. I have a master's degree. I've always even volunteered in hospitals. None of that made a difference whatsoever. So after my daughter was born, and I'll get to her story in a moment, it occurred to me the things that Deb was mentioning and were mentioned earlier about all of this going on in this world called the NICU, that most families, most parents that are having full-term pregnancies or expect to, maybe heard of it once or twice. They just think babies go there for a little bit of time and don't really have an understanding of what it's like to have a really premature or medically fragile baby. And I wanted to change that. So that's why I'm here. I did write a few books after my daughter's story to help share. I speak at events like this, and I advocate for babies and families. The most important part of my story is my daughter's. Her name is Joy, and she was born at 23 weeks gestation back in 2012. And she spent 121 days in the NICU. And that was a long time. Most people get to take their babies home, like was mentioned earlier, 3 days, 4 days, maybe even now, sometimes less than that. That wasn't our case. We were 121 days of excruciating emotional stress, decisions that had to be made, almost losing her life after almost losing my life 4 times. And my daughter, she experienced more medical interventions and pain in the first 4 months of her life than most healthy adults will experience in their entire life. And, one would say, thankfully, she doesn't remember that. And she doesn't remember that, but it has an effect on her still to this day. Going back historically, parents of premature and medically fragile babies really didn't have a lot of resources available to them. In some cases, they still don't, but we are trying to change that. And the more information, education we can give families will help them not only be able to process their situation better, but they'll be able to participate more in the decisions instead of really feeling like their decisions are made for them. In fact, instead, they can participate and make decisions alongside healthcare teams. And that's really important. like Deb mentioned earlier, there is a lack of research in NICUs in general. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it has to do with a lot of healthcare teams and research areas are not offering that because the population of premature babies is not as large as cancer patients and things like that. But also the parents are very reluctant to consent. And that's something that we're looking at in INC, and I'll get to that in a minute. But parents have a lot of reasons to not consent for their babies to participate in research. It could be just the actual approach that was made. It could be they weren't given enough education. It could be the time required, or just they don't understand what the research really is. So we're trying to change that. So Deb and I are part of INC, which stands for the International Neonatal Consortium. And just a very quick background, that was started in 2015 by Critical Path Institute. And the goal really was to improve neonatal research and therapies, period. That's kind of what they do. And since the very beginning, they've had NICU parents participate. I've been a part since inception, so has Deb. We've been co-chairs on different teams. We are both on the leadership team right now. And that's really critical because we can provide, real-time, weekly perspectives on whatever it is they're tackling or taking on at the moment. And we get to give not only our opinions, but we share our lived experiences. And there's no more guessing needed for that. And what makes it really unique, the INC and the work we do, is that we are such a multidisciplinary group. Of course, we have the NICU staff, we have neonatologists and nurses and physicians and researchers. We have regulators, even in industry, but they always include the parents. So just, sort of in closing, just to share what we've done, we have done a lot of work besides share our perspective. We've published papers recently in the Journal of Perinatology. We had a parent editorial that was based off of a primary paper on communication in the NICU. And me as a parent was one of the primary authors on that main paper. And then we also had a compendium editorial with a parent perspective on all of the research that we found. And these are live links, so you can click on them if you wish. And we've also in the past published in the Journal of Pediatrics about our stories and how our babies have names and families behind them. And that's really kind of important to remember when you're doing the research. And I am presenting our recent research at the Pediatric Academic Societies meeting. So out of all the stakeholders, they have a parent that is presenting the data. And that is certainly special, I think, for everybody listening today. So if you want to be involved with INC and any of the work we do, again, these are live links, but there is our website, and we have an amazing communications toolkit, and it's broken up into groups. You can click on different links if you are a neonatologist or a nurse or a parent or industry, and it tells you how you can be involved and what we've been doing. And I'll just close with a couple of other live links that I think you can have access to later regarding the INC, Critical Path, NICU Parent Network, which is an organization that both of us are members of. And it would be a great place to start if you're looking to ask for some parent input. We have so many parents that are NICU parent leaders that run their own organizations and nonprofits. And we have a wealth of people there that can provide information to you. EFC&I is another one. It's very similar, a parent organization in Europe, and you can reach out to them if you're looking for a parent perspective there. And we have another link on there, ICAN, which is the International Children's Advocacy Network that Deb and I both chair a parent chapter right now. And before I hand it off to our next presenter, you can click on these live links as well if you want to contact us at any point in the future. And we really appreciate you having us as parents on today.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you, ladies, for sharing your personal stories, giving us an understanding of the preemie parent perspective. That was amazing. Okay, we are moving on to our final speaker today. We'll now hear from the industry side of things. So Tom, it's great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Sydney, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to share some perspective, which will be a little bit of upstream orientation from the overview that Michael and Eric provided earlier, specifically focusing on pre-registration and how we can benefit from use of real-world data and derivatively derived real-world evidence to significantly improve efficiency of clinical trial conduct in a notoriously challenging environment to do so expeditiously. Before I jump in, just comment for the last two presenters, Deb and Jen. It's always inspiring to hear your perspective, and for me, definitely, as I'm running 1,000,000 miles an hour, is a good grounding perspective to be reminded of early and often. So I'm going to give, as I indicated, some perspective on use of real-world data, the various types of approaches that we have some recent experience with, and how I could see from a megatrend perspective, the industry is clearly moving in this direction. I have the great privilege of serving as a co-director with Jen and Deb on the leadership team for the International Neonatal Consortium as well. And as was intimated, use of real-world data in this type of environment is a very topical topic for the ecosystem today. And there's a number of reasons for that. As I've intimated, these trials are very, very difficult to do for a number of reasons. Number one, children can't advocate for themselves, And for this very reason, the voice of the parent is so critically important on the front end of design and implementation of a clinical trial. If you can't get the caretakers to get on board with the approach that you're advocating for, you simply will not be able to move forward with enrollment in a timely fashion. So I think assuring that perspective is captured early in the exercise to make sure that the pragmatic aspects are considered, as well as some of the more understanding the things that are important to the parent as it relates to designing the trial and considering various endpoints. There are often protracted enrollment periods, and many trials, certainly those that are conducted from academic institutions, never achieve their enrollment goals. And it's frustrating, to me at least. Jen mentioned the Pediatric Academic Societies meeting. This is a very important medical congress for this field. Every year they have symposia that highlight results of clinical trials in various areas of complications of prematurity. And I would say without exaggeration that 97% of them do not fully enroll, which means the trials are not powered to reach any conclusions. And oftentimes non-informative outcomes are observed. And if we don't change the way we behave and the way that we approach these trials, this trend that's persisted for a very long time will inevitably continue. And if in our hands, from a sponsor's hands perspective, if we don't complete our trial because we did not think through the feasibility elements well in the first place, we may fail to secure very, very valuable health authority incentives if the trial does not complete. So number one, I think making sure that we understand the parent's perspective and other key elements of feasibility are considered on the front end are key, not just because it's the right thing to do, it is, but there could be a material and negative business consequence if we don't think these things through. So how might real world data be helpful in this regard? There's a number of sources where we have evaluated actively utilization of real world data to serve as an alternative to, in some cases, even prospective enrollment of a control population. I'll come to that in a moment. So what are the sources of information? You've heard some reference to electronic medical records already. There are many registries for patients with various key complications of prematurity that exist. So quite a bit of cumulative patient life information available in this regard. The first speakers referenced observational studies. We tend to refer to these type of studies as natural history studies in industry speak, where we strive to try to understand the progression of the disease and what the patient experiences through disease without any exposure to test article. which could have a host of useful, provide a host of useful insights for us. And I'll touch on a few. And then, of course, peer-reviewed studies and publications are often chock full of reasonable data that can be borrowed for other purposes. Particularly if these are contemporary studies in a reasonably overlapping patient population. How may we think about using real-world data in trials, specifically in trials focused on the population of relevance for our discussion today? So, number one is straightforward information standardization, and this is a front and center project for us at the International Neonatal Consortium. Roughly 2 years ago, as we had a little bit of a reshuffle of our leadership team, we decided that this was going to be an area of priority. And FDA had issued a request for proposals for a grant that specifically focused on use of real-world data in vulnerable patient populations. And when I became aware of this, I said to the team, guys, I think we have among the most vulnerable patient population. We should take a run at this. And long story short, we were successful in securing a several $1 million grant over a 3-year period. And because the goal at the INC is to essentially be the rising tide that lifts all ships, we don't focus on company-centric topics. It's a pre-competitive or a non-competitive environment. We focused on an area that we all saw a significant issue with. Laboratory values as a function of gestational age and postnatal age are not standardized in key global geographies around the world. Every institution, every IDN in the United States, every country around the world uses their own and oftentimes different standards to gauge normalcy of a laboratory result or lack thereof. And the problem with this is, I suspect that there are many cases where we may observe what we believe to be an abnormal laboratory value in a clinical trial, which may not be as a function of gestational and postnatal age, or vice versa. So by having a means of standardizing with a global standard that is used by everyone, I think we get much closer to truth from a safety perspective when evaluating a new compound. So this is our ambition, and our goal is to solicit, Deb mentioned this, data sets from sponsors, from large IDNs in the United States, from national EMR systems. There are many countries outside of this world that centralize all of their data in an EMR. So we're essentially capturing data for all children 0 to 2 years of age, specifically with an eye towards gestational and postnatal age, with a battery of about 30 or so standard laboratory tests, and work with CPATH to then subsequently curate the real-world data into real-world evidence. And we look forward to delivering on this project as we move into 2023. You can use real-world data sets to better identify what I like to call patient endotypes. When we use terms like bronchopulmonary dysplasia or necrotizing enterocolitis, which are key complications of prematurity, I think oftentimes we have almost a kindergarten understanding of the disease. And in fact, they're likely not one disease, but likely a constellation of many diseases that have genetic and non-genetic underpinnings. So if we can use new technologies to look at large data sets and help us to find endotypes of patients that can be identified clinically, that may help us enrich a patient population to minimize heterogeneity to test for a treatment effect if one exists. And finally, I alluded to this and promised I would come back to it in my closing remarks. I'm particularly interested in the concept of synthetically controlling studies, borrowing data from other data sources to effectuate a synthetic control as a means of providing tier 1 evidence. Years ago, when I started in this game, this was not a practice that health authorities would have found palatable. But as the field of the data sciences has matured to the degree that it has, we can in fact take seemingly disparate data sets and force conformance to ultimately produce tier 1 level evidence. We have recent experience in a trial specifically focused on a key complication of prematurity, retinopathy of prematurity in this case. And we were able to convince two global health authorities that this, in fact, would be an appropriate path forward, which it was. So I would encourage those that are in the business of thinking about clinical trials in these very vulnerable patients to think about ways that we could build in efficiency into the trials to assure that we complete them and we generate tier 1 level evidence. And then finally, just to close out, again, my contact information, if anybody has any interest in a follow-up conversation. And again, as both Deb and Jen mentioned, if there's interest in learning more about the International Neonatal Consortium, we'd be more than happy to share our experiences with you when we would have more time to dedicate to the topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was a really great overview from the industry perspective. Okay, let's dive right into our Q&A session. So I'll bring everyone back on to join you, Tom. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I just want to remind everyone in the audience to please submit your questions using the Ask a Question panel that's wiggling on your screen now. So let's jump right in and begin with our first question. This one is for Eric and Mike. What data sources and capabilities are crucial for payers to have to generate high quality RWE in maternity and other conditions?
Great. I'll take that first, and I'll let Mike chime in. So it's a great question. There really are sort of several key components to this, right? I think first and foremost is a recognition, that real world evidence is needed, a commitment to generating it, and a commitment to investing, in what is needed to be able to pull that off. One, you need data, right? You need, and we saw from our one of the limitations, in our polling question that folks noted was, not having the data that they need. So, as a payer, harnessing, all of the information that you have on your members is of vital importance. It highlights the value of what you might term as integrated benefits, meaning you have all of their medical claims, you have their pharmacy claims, you have other benefit type services and claims, whether it's dental or behavioral, what have you. And that's super important to pull in. Having the ability to identify and link these individuals to electronic health records, as well as to other data sets that could be valuable. For example, data sets, such as the National Death Index, as an example, can be very valuable. You have to have the ability to maintain the data, right? You have to manage it. You have to be able to organize it in a way that facilitates research. And lastly, you need the people and the expertise from different disciplines, whether it's HEOR, statistics, analytics, programming, health services research, to be able to do that. And Mike, I'd like to invite you to chime in as well.
Great, thank you, Eric. One item I wanted to pick up on was also mentioned in one of our polling questions. The second question asked about challenges as it relates to generating or using real-world evidence, and I think about a third or more of respondents mentioned that there are doubts about the methodological rigor, for example, compared to RCTs that affect their use of real-world evidence. And I think these are often, deeply held, beliefs regarding biases when you use observational data and observational study designs, primarily around the lack of randomization and concerns about unmeasured confounding. There has been a lot of progress in understanding what can drive differences between an RCT and an observational study. over the last decade. And randomization turns out to be not one of the key ones. A lot of it really has more to do with appropriately designing the study, to start follow-up at the correct time, to account for censoring and things like that. There are in fact several collaborations right now, such as the RCT duplicate one, that explicitly have FDA sponsorship and try and see how easy or how difficult it is to replicate RCTs with observational data. HealthCore itself is also engaged in this field. We are very interested in promoting good causal research using observational data. In fact, we'll have an upcoming workshop at a conference in a couple of weeks. But we invite any discussions and from folks who are interested in how to better use real-world evidence for their purposes, including regulatory submissions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was really informative. The next question here is for Jen and Deb, and I'm going to add a second part to the question. So, what steps can we take to get the patient voice even better integrated into research projects and policy making in this space? And I want to add as well this other question, and how would one join the INC?
Do you want me to start? I can start.
Sure, go for it.
And then you fill in. Well, I'll go with the second part. To join the INC, you can reach out to any of us, and me or Deb or Tom, and we'll put you in contact with the appropriate person, or you can visit the website that was linked before. To include parents, really, that's kind of what we do. So you could reach out to Deb or I, or you can visit the NICU Parent Network, and that is your largest umbrella of U.S. NICU parent professionals who do this work and advocate. We've spoken on Capitol Hill. We've been in all kinds of legislative sessions, and we provide our opinions. And oftentimes we private contract with healthcare companies to provide our opinions and review documents. So if you reach out to one of us or NICU Parent Network, and the component of that in Europe would be EFCNI, we can get you that information as well. And Deb, you want to add some of your other work?
Sure. So I'm a co-founder of the Alliance for Black NICU Families. It's been very enlightening in this space to hear about access to these families and the lack of trust in the community in terms of, all you have to do is read the news about COVID, and that's a perfect example. But our goal is to educate and advocate and help the community understand these interventions and participate. We believe we're going to have great success with that. But also NPN is a phenomenal organization, as is EFCNI. So there are, and there's a group also in Australia too. There are a few groups. And so I think there is patient outreach. I think you just got to connect and talk to them. It doesn't need to be a complicated conversation. It should be a connecting point. We want to do better. How do we involve you? That's all you got to do. And Inc. is a free membership, by the way. There's no cost to join, and we meet all over the world. So there you go.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you both. We might go a couple minutes over. Just want to let the audience know we're going to get to one more question here, but this recording will be available on demand, so you can always come back to watch it. As well, feel free to submit your questions, and they will be answering them, and a Q&A report will be available after the webinar. So let's do one more question here for Tom. What challenges are you experiencing in creating and using real-world evidence for your purposes?
A great question, and I think in some respects overlapping to some of the payer-related topics that were made earlier. It's you really, what I've really come to appreciate is that you need to be careful to avoid garbage in, garbage out, right? How the data is curated, the quality control and consistency of the data sets. Needs to be at a threshold that's consistent with expectations in our world with regulators. I would argue that the expectation and the standards for data submissions are of paramount importance for this particular circumstance, where a regulatory authority is making a definitive decision about whether the evidence supports conclusions of safety and efficacy. So I made the point, and I kind of took through a cascade a little bit. While EMR data is plentiful, it's not always consistently managed from a quality control perspective. Whereas some of the observational based studies and or natural history studies that have been referenced in my talk and in the beginning session, they're the advantage of a natural history study that you prospectively create is that you can curate the data set perfectly and assure a priori that quality controls are in place. So I think really being mindful of, yes, there is quite a number of sources of data, but you have to make sure that data is going to be fit for your intended purpose. And if your purpose is in support of generating tier 1 level evidence to ultimately pursue prescribing information and labeling, I think you should need to be prepared for a fairly rigorous conversation with your counterparts at your health authority to assure that they understand that the data is usable for the intended purpose.
That was great, really informative. Thank you, Tom. Okay, sure. So with that, we've reached the end. Thank you so much, everyone, for all of your fantastic insights and the information today. It was really a pleasure to have you with us.